Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Data-Centric Strategy and Roadmap, the first in the 2015 year in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Now let me give the floor to Megan Jacobs, the webinar organizer from Data Blueprint, to introduce our speakers for today and today's webinar. Megan, hello and welcome.
Thanks, Shannon. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Megan Jacobs, and I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We are pleased that you found the time to join us for today's webinar on Data-Centric Strategy and Roadmap. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon and Dataversity for hosting us. We'll get started in just a few moments after I let you know about some housekeeping items and introduce your presenters. We have a 1-hour presentation followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. We'll try to answer as many questions as time allows, but feel free to submit questions as they come up throughout the session. And to answer the top 2 most commonly asked questions, yes, you will receive an email with links to download today's materials and the webinar recording so you can view afterwards. The materials will be sent out within the next 2 business days. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter, so if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. We'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed and we'll include answers to those questions in our post-session email. Now, let me introduce you to our presenter. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 8 books. The most recent is Monetizing Data Management. Now, Peter, I'll introduce our special guest for today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Megan. Our co-presenter today is my friend and colleague, longtime CEO of Data Blueprint, Louis Broom. Louis has been in the space almost as long as I am, only just because he's a little younger than I am. That's the only difference we have on there. Louis has got lots of experience in the New York financial community, but in the last 5 years, he's hit a lot of companies and done an awful lot of really good work in this area. That's some of the stuff we're going to tell you about today as well. The subject today is, of course, strategy and roadmap. And what we're going to do is give you a data strategy overview, talk specifically about determining the business needs. And again, your strategy doesn't matter if it doesn't match what the business is doing. We have lots of things. Louis and I will probably finish each other's sentences a couple times on the session today, but one of the key pieces to this is if you haven't got the requirements, the rest of the process doesn't make a whole lot of difference. We'll talk about measurement and success criteria and how to understand the current state analysis. And we have a twist that we do here that we find that others have not done as well as what we do in this area, and it's really understanding how it's great to have a big strategy that you're going to go off and do, but at the same time, if your organization isn't quite ready for what that strategy is, it can be a great strategy that is very difficult to implement. And so this is one of the things that we're going to talk about here, that says, how do we make sure that what strategy you develop is actually going to work within your environment, within your culture, and the rest of the context that we look at this. And we'll talk about developing a solution to address those specific needs and roadmap. And I will say this is a preview, if you will, of a couple of sessions that we're going to do at Enterprise Data World that we hope to see you all at the end of March in Washington, D.C. So let's dive into the process here. And of course, the first piece of this is that, goodness, if you're really happy with the way data is working out in your organization, you shouldn't be on this webinar. Most of the people we talk to, in fact, the vast majority of the people we talk to, look and say there is room for improvement. And so you can't go back and address those problems by doing the same things that you have been doing all along. The idea here is, of course, that putting them together was sort of short-term and piecemeal, and now we need to come back and, after the fact, do something that's fairly comprehensive and long-term and lasting in that sense. Another word that we use for strategy here is Wayne Gretzky's famous phrase here. He looks, when he was asked about strategy, he says, well, I don't chase the puck, I go to where I think the puck will be. And if I happen to be at the right place, I can score a goal there. And that's really what we want to talk about is sort of leapfrogging the current focus where everybody is trying to do one thing and chasing everybody. You know, you see lots and lots of strategies, and this company will get it, and that company will get it. Loyalty cards are one of the examples now. I don't know about you all, we've got way too many loyalty cards in our pockets these days. And it is great to have that sort of thing out there, but once again, if you aren't able to say what is the organizational strategy, and of course underneath that an IT strategy and a data strategy. The rest of this doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And more importantly, if your data strategy is off in left field and not matched to your organizational strategy, you may achieve something with the data, but it won't help the organization. And of course, we need organizations to give us that rest of the picture that goes into it. We've been using this model here for a couple of years, and the idea is that most organizations really are down in quadrant 1, where they have little or no strategy around their data management. In fact, they sort of think somebody else is taking care of it. Now, if we back off and look at the 2 dimensions here, on the y-axis, you'll see there's an innovation word, and on the x-axis, it's improve operations. That's the first piece that you have to do. It's very difficult to take, well, let me just go to the right first of all. So quadrant 2 is really focused on increasing organizational efficiency and effectiveness. This means you're doing more with what you have, making it better, and trying to really come out on top in terms of the things that you're doing, going for sort of a world-class operational type thing. We call it operational excellence here at Data Blueprint, and we actually practice it internally as well. Quadrant 3 is sort of the new stuff where all the sexy things are going, where the data science is occurring and things like that. It's using data to create new strategic opportunities, and that's a great thing to do. Our caution here, however, is you can't do both of them at once. The same knowledge, skills, and ability that are required in quadrant 2 to help your organization become a fine-tuned machine. And Lewis is going to give you a couple of examples in a few minutes of organizations that are really good in quadrant 2. Those people, those knowledge, skills, and abilities are not necessarily the same ones. You can make them into it, but it is a longer path to do that. Similarly, if you're not as worried about increasing effectiveness and efficiencies, you can go straight to quadrant 3. There's no problem with doing it, but realize there it is going to cost more because you haven't derived the operational effectiveness. And if you follow our process here of quadrant 1, quadrant 2, and then quadrant 3, quadrant 2 can help you to take resources that you can use to invest in quadrant 3. And that is a huge opportunity for most organizations to do that. Of course, quadrant 4 is what we get when we go into an awful lot of organizations because they say, well, we're really good and we can do both of those things simultaneously. And we can be helpful in those situations, but not as helpful if they would pick one or the other. So again, summary on this chart, pick quadrant 2 or quadrant 3, try to do that first, get good at that, and then move into either quadrant 2 or quadrant 3, whichever one you haven't done. Do you want to jump in?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to, closing out this slide, I think the thing that we have understood and discovered in working with clients and really working with data for so long, really there's only 2 plays that you can use with data to impact the organization. And I just wanted to emphasize this. This, to us is a really important slide. And really when we say improve operations, we're talking about efficiencies. And really to get efficiencies through data, it is about having the foundational infrastructure in place. This is about having good data quality. This is about having good governance processes on maintaining good data quality, whereas the only other play with data really is innovation. And innovation, in other words, you can think of it as insight. It's creating insights. Data creates insights, and it can create insights for better operations, but it could create insights for new products, new opportunities. So when you think about the impact of leveraging data within your organization to create value, it's either about creating greater efficiency or creating insights. And to Peter's point, going to quadrant 2 really is the smart play before going to quadrant 3, because going straight to quadrant 3, often you find that it is very difficult, it's more expensive, and it's less effective. So getting into why data is so important to the business strategy. And I think what we believe here at Data Blueprint is that the future marketplace is really going to be differentiated by those that are innovative, agile, and competent with data. And I think many people would agree with this, and they understand, but it really becomes the main differentiator. And when we talk about leveraging data to create a competitive advantage or to create value within an organization, I think we're moving well beyond figuring out which products to deliver to which customers. And I will promise you, data in the marketing space is critical, and it's probably as critical as it's ever been. But now data is playing roles in so many other aspects of business operations and business opportunities and product development. So here are a few of our ideas about really how data is changing the game really in the marketplace. One, that data is linked to and part of products and services. So the old example of this is FedEx. Right? They pick up a product from point A and they take it to point B. They've been doing that forever. But as soon as you can track your product and you know where it is, and if it's a day late, you're okay with it. That transparency into that process all of a sudden creates huge amount of value for you in getting that service. I think Patagonia is a newer example where in their clothing line is that they've created full transparency into the supply chain of that piece of clothing that you're buying, to the point where they have discontinued a very successful line of their cashmere sweaters because they couldn't get transparency into that supply chain. So, but they find that people are buying their products because they want to know that they were grown organically or that, you know, the workers were treated humanely. So information is power. So of course we all get this and we think about, oh, I want a 360-degree view of my customers. But really what we're talking about is information has given us the ability to get a 360-degree view of really our entire operating environment. So this is our products, our vendors, our competitors, our regulators, and other things that impact or may impact our organization. It could be commodities that are way up the supply chain. So information has given us that power so that we can react, so organizations can react before their competitors to the changing environment, right? This next one I really love, and I think it's really interesting how information and data is changing the work we do, the skills that are needed, and the workplace. And really what this is about is that it's no longer, you know, important to have the information, to know the information. It's really because information is available to everybody. So the workplace is changing and the skills are changing such that you can work in teams using information to solve problems creatively. I would suggest to people reading The Decoded Company. It is a book about an IT consulting company that has had phenomenal growth and how it has changed their workplace, how information and data has really just, you know, anyway, it's an amazing story, so I would recommend that book. And then the last one is around, you know, really just saying that the legacy systems and processes that we have in place were not set up to be able to process the volume and variety of data coming at us at the speed it's coming at us today. And so organizations are at huge operational and reputational risk in order to really be able to operate. So these are just some ideas about why data is important, and I just put this note in the bottom about Simon Sinek's his presentation on the TED Talks. It's really interesting because understanding why and getting back to why this is important in your data strategy is data strategy, you know, is implying that you're trying to be a data-centric organization, and you need to start thinking about it in these terms before you get to the details, because you have to create a vision as part of your data strategy, and it's things like this that need to be part of that vision. So just quickly, how we put a data strategy together, and we have a diagram later to go over this, but really what you need to do at the beginning is you need to get a fundamental understanding of how your organization creates value. Now that's whether it's a government organization or for commercial organization or nonprofit, how does it create value? So what is its competitive advantage operating models and the business goals? And from that, we need to pull out what are those business goals or opportunities that then we can tie to the data strategy. Your data strategy must be tied to that. And then in order to be able to demonstrate the value of your data strategy, it must be measurable. You must be able to measure the value of what you're creating through your data strategy. So it is not a step you can skip. It is a must. And then when you get into developing the solution, Peter sort of touched on this earlier, right? We're looking at really holistically all the pieces that really touch or need to be touched as part of your strategy, right? And that includes limitations of your culture and your capability. And then a roadmap, of course, is going to help you get to implementation. And the note at the bottom really is important. I mean, I think this is actually probably the most important point and the most difficult to solve, right? To become a data-driven organization is really transformation in how we think. Back to the first slide from Einstein, you know, we have to think differently than when we created the problems that we're in now. So determining the business needs. So in this, we're going to go over again how we fundamentally analyze and get a business understanding, identify how we then identify some specific business needs we could try to tie to our data strategy, and then some examples. So aligning data management goals to the business. And how do you analyze the business? And really, this is how you analyze the fundamentals of the business. So first is competitive advantage. You know, it's counterintuitive, but understanding what your organization's competitive advantage is, it's not about being best. It's about how you're different. How do you create value differently than your competitors? Operating models, when we go through this, you know, you'll start to recognize the different operating models, and from that implies how data impacts those different operating models. Because really what you're trying to do, again, with your data strategy is identify those business strategy and goals that data can impact. And so that's that you know, looking at leadership's priorities, investments. And really, this is all like thinking like a management consultant. So we use frameworks to go through this. So walking through a couple examples. So we like Michael Porter. If you've listened to any of my other talks, I'm a big fan, but he has this great competitive strategic framework, and it's a matrix, so across the top, lower cost, and differentiation. So it's really, this is looking at the type of products that you offer. So as an organization, whether it's products or services, are you offering something that is based on being lower cost or being differentiated? And then looking down the y-axis, essentially, it's, you know, it's the dimensions of your market. So are you offering your products or services to a broad range of buyers, or is it more of a niche market? And this blue ocean brands in the center really is saying you can't be in multiple places in this matrix. It confuses the customer. So really your organization, whether they talk about it or not, has positioned themselves somewhere in this matrix. And why is that important to your data strategy? Because this is starting to get a fundamental understanding of how data, because the data that you need and the data problems you're going to solve, so for someone who is lower cost, are probably going to be different than someone that's differentiated in a niche market. So as an example, right, looking at, just took Walmart and Whole Foods, and actually around here we love to play this game. You know, you bring up a company and, well, where do you think they fit? And it'll create a debate.
As part of our work on developing strategies for this.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So again, it's how they create value. So clearly, you know, I looked at Walmart as a retail grocer, and Walmart is selling to everybody in the world, very broad range, and they're low cost every day. Is that it?
Low cost.
Everyday low cost, right? Whole Foods, right, is a broad range of buyers, but they're very differentiated, and it's, you know, it's kind of very interesting here, right? I mean, it's amazing what someone will pay for a pear at Whole Foods. I mean, there seems to be no amount of money that's too much to buy fruit at Whole Foods, right? But at Walmart, if there is someone who's going to offer something at a lower cost, those people, those customers are going to go somewhere else. So the data that impacts those organizations and how they would leverage data based on their market positioning is really important. So if you're a nonprofit or a government organization, really you could just substitute mission for value, because, you know, these ideas are applicable for those organizations as well. So continuing on with the competitive advantage analysis, so Porter then has these 5 forces framework, and really what he's saying here is these are the 5 forces that impact an organization or describes an organization's competitive advantage. And really the first 2 is about who has the greater bargaining power. So for bargaining power of buyers, so who has leverage? So in the Walmart example, You know, buyers will go somewhere else if it's cheaper. But for Whole Foods, you know, it doesn't matter what the price is, those buyers are going to shop at Whole Foods, right? Suppliers, though, it's probably quite reversed, right? So for Walmart, those suppliers, we all know Walmart puts pressure on their suppliers to give them the price they want, and they make their suppliers do all kinds of things for them. And they also demand certain data and information from their suppliers in order to make sure that they have efficient operations at Walmart, right? Whereas there are limited amount of suppliers for Whole Foods. So, you know, you can kind of get the idea, threat of new entrants, probably expensive to get into retail grocery, substitute of products. So looking at this and analyzing this, which I've done on the next page for Whole Foods and Walmart, you could start to see how these organizations are different, and it should start to imply what kind of data needs that they would have, what is important to them. So clearly in Whole Foods, having transparency into the supply chain is important to them as well, just like Patagonia. Well, you know, for Walmart, that's probably less important, but clearly understanding, you know, their suppliers is the important thing. So continuing on and now looking at operating models. There are basically, and I believe this is a Gartner, I couldn't find it exactly, but it is fairly common. Across the bottom axis is business process standardization. So how standardized do the business processes need to be? How common, you know, how common is everybody's operating model? And then up the y-axis is how integrated are those business processes across divisions, business units, or areas within divisions within an organization. So starting in the top left-hand corner, coordination. Well, this is saying I have high business process integration, but low standardization. So this is basically saying that you have business units that act autonomously, right? But so that means they don't have to have common standards across those business units, but transactions go across those business units. So in a customer transaction, multiple business units are involved. So unification is where it's high and high. So this is really saying that there's, you know, that it's a highly integrated transaction across business units, and they're doing very common things. In other words, their operations within this business units are really having overlapping similarities in operations. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, diversification is basically saying that, you know, the business units are within an organization are very different, and they operate differently, and they're completely separate, and the transactions do not cross. And replication is basically saying you have standardized business processes, but there's no need to integrate between those business units. And maybe some examples will help with my explanations. So IBM is a highly coordinated, has a highly coordinated operating model. So we know IBM has global services, they sell hardware and software, they have cloud services, and so they're going after the same customers. They work with the same customers. But cloud services and hardware, software, and global services, they are different operating business units. But they work together in the way that they serve their customers. So they have transactions, and they operate with, you know, some other organization in delivering their services, but they operate as separate business units. Goldman Sachs, though, on the other hand, though, is a global integrated company that does trade processing for all kinds of people. And you may be, they're serving the same customers across derivatives as they are fixed income, as they are equities. And then they have the standard processes for how they settle those trades, how they do cash management, how they do treasury, right? GE sells airplane engines and does healthcare, right? Those two things are not related. They're never related. They don't have to worry about being integrated. And replication is Chipotle, right, is saying that you have standard processes. Every time you go into Chipotle, it works the same, but those stores are completely separate from other stores. And again, why this is important is in fundamentally understanding your business, you can start to see what is important to the business. And it's really about getting on the same page with your business organization. So the final piece then is now starting to look at the business strategy and goals. And really what this is a sort of time and place, the leadership of an organization is saying, given my market position and given my operating model and given the opportunities in the marketplace, I'm going to set out on a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year, whatever the time frame may be. This is our company's strategy and goals, right? And it's dynamic in the sense that it's being created as a result of the opportunities and challenges. And now we're starting to drill down into something that the data strategy can tie into. So here's just a very rough example of a business strategy for a large logistics company, very large trucking company. And a lot of words on the page, but in that sort of middle, it says our strategy is based on utilizing an integrated multimodal approach to provide capacity-oriented solutions. And so really what this is kind of telling you is this fits up in that coordinated quadrant for operating models. And you can look just at their brand promises, you can start to understand they're not about low cost. Anywhere in there, it's not trying to say it's going to save you money, but they are saying that they're very differentiated. And again, this starts to be important because what we did for this particular client, now we're able to create data strategy business goals. And now we're tying into what's really important to the organization. So they wanted asset and driver utilization maximized across the enterprise, right? Well, that's clearly a clue that data about their trucks and their trailers and their drivers is really important, and the activities that go with those things in order to maximize their utilization. At the bottom, you could see minimize costs and maximize revenue per load per division. So they have these multiple divisions. They serve the same clients, so they share clients, but they provide different type of trucking services, right? And at the high level, these are the goals.
I have another point on this one too, and that's that many of you have expressed frustration to us when we talk to you offline, that you can come up with a good data strategy, but you have had a hard time getting management to pay attention to this. This makes this stuff so tangible to management that they go, that's what's been missing from this. Before, all this data strategy talks about a bunch of technical talk about platforms and, you know, other stuff that I don't understand, but when you tell me I understand my trucks, I need to understand the trucks. And they'll pound on the table the same way we do.
Thanks, Peter, and that's exactly right. And I'll sort of just quickly go through this, but now we're getting into something very specific in their data strategy. So it's about increasing operational efficiencies, lower cost per order and load, increased capacity. And then you can look at the 2B, the things that we're going to start working on for them, eliminate non-value added manual workarounds. Well, you know what? This is about dealing with data quality issues that create manual workarounds. So, you know, identifying that we're now dealing with data quality issues related to drivers and their assets is important. Maximize auto accepts in their transaction processing. This has everything to do with their master data management. And then, you know, not reading all this off here, but the next step we did after this is we created very specific targets for which we were going to try and maximize auto accepts. And we identified targets for eliminating non-value added work. So, you know, it's sort of building from a fundamental understanding of the business into their specific business strategy to come up with those business goals and objectives for your data strategy. So really, you know, the other thing I will say about this, something about this slide is this is really hard work. This is where the technical stuff is so much easier once you understand this. This is where the effort is. This is where the new skills are. This is ultimately what is going to make your data strategy work or not work. So with that in mind, right, the next step is to go into how do you create the measures, because only if you can demonstrate success will they buy your data strategy.
So we'll talk about an overview of the general process that we do, and they give a very specific example on how this is done. And again, the frustration that we've heard a lot of our folks that we work with is that how do I measure this? It seems so intangible. You know, if I make the data better, IT will be better, and then if IT gets better, then we'll have a business outcome. Well, that's 3 steps, and that's hard for people to really relate. So as Lois mentioned before, this is hard. Absolutely not intuitive, and there's no way it can be done without understanding the business. And one of the fun things that we get here at Data Blueprint occasionally is that, we'll get some of these things, we call them an over the transom. It's just a call that, somebody looks us up on the internet and says, hey, I need a data strategy. And our first question back to them, of course, is, well, what's your business strategy? And they go, well, we don't know. And we say, well, we really can't help you with that. We could create some shelfware that you could put on the shelf and charge you some money for it, but that's not the way we work. We want to add value. So when you start to talk about adding value, what you see here oftentimes is that people don't really understand the concepts that are involved in this. So here's a couple of them right now. Measurement is not really about measuring things. It's about reducing uncertainty. So it has an awful lot less to do with determining exact values and a lot more to do with trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So the objects of measurement, customer satisfaction, things like this, these are absolutely tangible things that you can get to if you have a good foundation. If you don't have a good foundation, it doesn't help. Last point on this slide is that we really want to have people understand a lot of different things. So our team here is very versed on having lots and lots of different methods that they can use to apply to it. And what they're good at is recognizing that this tool in this situation will create business value for this customer. But you can't take that same process and apply it to another customer that doesn't have the same set of core values that are there. A lot of this material comes from a book that we both found inspirational here. A guy named Douglas Hubbard wrote this book a couple of years back, How to Measure Anything. He's actually up to a 3rd edition now, and we use this in my classes at the university as well. The key is that by formalizing this process around measurement, it forces clarity to the process. So when somebody says, hey, okay, it starts out being vague, but then we go on and say, hey, you mean the hay that somebody shouts, or do you mean the hay that you feed horses, right? And again, you get into it a little bit further. Just a quick side note on this book, and I know Liz mentioned one as well. It's probably about 10 books we'd recommend to people to really get into it. Chapter 7 has a complete chapter on how to measure the value of an additional piece of information to a decision. So one of the things we'll see in organizations is that they're scared to move forward because they don't have perfect information. And we use Hubbard's framework here and say, look, you may pay $1 million for this, but it's only a $10,000 decision, so it seems kind of not appropriate. I can tell you I've sold more of Douglas Hubbard's books than I've sold of our own books here at Data Blueprint, but it's a great set of things. Again, lots and lots of really, really good information there. We're just kind of scratching the surface here, but let's take a very specific example here. Again, one of our groups that we've worked with over a number of years is an international chemical company, and they focus in on testing engines. We had a lot of fun with the guys in the back because we told them they had to wear lab coats, and they're thinking, oh, medical, right? And it's like, nope. If you go down there in the basement, they have engines that are running, and you will get oil spilled on you. What they're trying to do is make engines run better, cleaner, smoother, the machines last longer. All of these kinds of things are there, and they're making these different synthetic oils and additives to the engines to do it. It's a $1 billion+ business, great group of folks that they work with. They are researchers primarily, and as they are researching this process, they run tests, and each test they run runs $25,000 to $250,000. It's a lot of money, and when we started working with them probably 5 years ago, they really didn't have a good corporate memory, so they didn't even know if the person in the next cubicle was running the same test that was going in place. So they were putting in place lab management systems and things like this. Now, what we did is say, okay, let's get to the measurables. How many tests are we running per customer? How many products are we formulating? What types of products? What complexity? These are things that we can put together and measure specifically. Customer satisfaction. How long does it take to come up with a specific formulation from inception to certification that we can actually get out and use it? And these are things that were important for their data strategy. These are not going to be important for everybody, but for the specific customers. Finally, the researcher productivity. How do you measure how many papers they do or how many additives that they do? Well, we went back and grabbed the historical data that they had, and were able to put this together. Now, I have to show you this next chart. The first thing that we did when we showed them this chart, they said, oh, you can stop right there. And we said, why? And they said, well, we've never really understood what they did. So here's a good chart that describes what they did. And they thought we were done. And we said, no, this is just our understanding in order to get to this stage. But it turned out that productivity of these individuals, who about 100 of them, and they had PhDs in chemical engineering. Okay, so they're a very smart group. But if you look through this chart, we didn't produce this chart to show them their workflow. We needed to understand it ourselves, and they were happy to get a copy of it. But we wanted to point out some challenges that were in their existing workflow. First of all, there was at least a process that's actually right in the very center of the diagram there in the dark purple, where a PhD in chemical engineering was taking digital data from one computing system and turning to another computer and rekeying that exact data into the next computer. And that was a part of the basic workflow. That wasn't just one. We found multiple instances of this. I guarantee you anybody on this call could have solved that problem for them. But remember, their forte is chemical engineering. They're not IT specialists. They're certainly not data specialists on this, although they were specialists in their own way. We found numerous instances of file movement where they were doing NikeNet and moving things around with USB sticks and things like this. Again, workflow software can help that process. Of course, we don't want to just implement workflow software for them. We wanted to look at it as a coordinated solution. There was lots and lots of manipulation that would occur. For example, somebody from overseas would send data in and they would forget to round numbers, or they would forget to convert them from metric to English. We had lots of synonym reconciliations. Oh yes, this person always uses the term, lander, and lander meant different things in different contexts that were there. There were a lot of tribal knowledge that occurred, and the very final bottom line of this, and as I mentioned before, this was 5 years ago. Some of you remember the little fox icons that are up there. They had truly non-sustainable technology. The software package that they were using to manage this stuff hadn't even been sold commercially for 10 years. Now, why would they know or not know this? Because they're chemical engineers. They're just terrific people. But you don't know if you're a chemical engineer that your database is out of date, perhaps not Y2K compliant and things like that. Let me take this a little further, because this was an interesting project. One of the things that we found out in the process of working on this was that they were buying a new package for some of their laboratory systems, and we said, well, it'd be a good idea to get a data model of that laboratory system so we can see how well it's going to complement your existing practices. When they sent it to, actually, the first thing they did is they said, well, the data model is not quite ready, and we went, well, they're only weeks away from shipping it. That's not a good sign. That's where warning bells on our start to go off on that. And sure enough, when it arrived, it didn't work very well. Turned out they had a flaw in the laboratory package. We actually went back and fixed that, so we got another customer out of this by going back to the software company, who had, by the way, subcontracted the data work from another software company. It gets very complicated. Point is here, you've got a group of 100 PhDs. They're doing great work. They are being productive. The company is making money. But it turned out they, like most of the data scientists in the world today, are only about 20% really productive. And our goal was to make them only 60% unproductive by doubling their productivity. And the way we did that was through a series of process improvements around this. So again, a series of business process improvements, architecture, data quality implementation, integrated system development, which resulted in measurable reductions in the number of tests needed to develop the products, the number of tests performable by a researcher, and finally, reducing the time to the market. This is one where I turned around to Lewis and said, how much do we charge them? If they're claiming a $25 million gain, I'd like a portion of that, right?
Well, Peter, I saw a comment flash up on the screen from someone.
Yeah. I don't know if everybody else saw that or not.
That said, this is how scientists work. And I tell you what, this is exactly how scientists work.
And it's not just scientists. It's almost every form of knowledge worker that's out there.
Well, researchers, and we run into this a lot, and especially some of the government, federal government organizations that and state that are focused on doing a lot of research, but this organization does research, and it is very interesting that it's universal that they will claim that they are spending up to 60 to 90% of their time manually manipulating data so they can actually do their research. And I think, to Peter's point, we're never going to solve it all because that's just how researchers and scientists think. But there are things that we can do to increase their efficiency so they're able to actually do more tests.
Again, these are really smart people, but this wasn't in their forte. So summary of this little section here, if it's important to the business, it's measurable. And if we understand that we need to change our concept of what it means to measure So we could tie those measurements to specific business objectives on this, and then go back and look at our holistic solution on all of this. So that's our current state analysis. Now we're moving to what we call analyzing the current state.
So really, and why we're analyzing the current state is clearly to identify existing assets to be leveraged. And what we find is when we're in an organization, and that diagram we looked at for the previous section, right, we find that there are lots of pockets of assets to be leveraged within an organization. They just haven't been cohesively tied together into a strategy. There, as an example, there are always data stewards existing. I mean, that is, organizations almost couldn't operate if they didn't have data stewards, but there are people that are acting as data stewards in some way or fashion out of necessity, right? But they're kind of being you know, you could probably think of them as your data heroes, the people you go to when you really need to know something about the data. And of course, we want to identify the gaps and the things that are really causing pain in the organization. We want to really understand how all the pieces that impact data and leveraging data are tied together within the organization because there's dependencies and there's existing constructs that will have to be dealt with as you're developing a solution. So you want to understand that in the current state. And then this last point is really, you know, it's the showstopper, folks. You know, you can do all these other things, but the cultural readiness for change is the number one issue. If there's one thing that is consistent across all our engagements, is that it requires some degree of change management. And because really, when we're talking about a data strategy, you know, this is one way to approach leveraging data as an asset. Certainly you could, you know, and it's top down, and that's what we're suggesting, but it's not the only way, and we see other organizations that do it bottoms up. But in this context of this conversation, we're talking about a top-down approach, and that's going to require cultural readiness. And so measuring that, because you're going to have to figure out when you're creating your solution, do I need 10% of the investment to be in change management, or do I need 20% to be in change management? So this is really the framework that we use to think about or to create a data strategy. So we've talked about the business need. That was the first section, right? Looking at the objectives of competitive advantage, getting to something that's measurable to the business. And so now we're looking at the current state, right? And both of these will be inputs into the solution. And I think the important thing and the way, and the reason we drew it this way is that the solution needs to, you need to strike the balance between creating value that it specifically addresses the measurable business need while creating capabilities or strengthening your data management capabilities at the same time. And at the beginning, when you're just first starting your journey and you're coming up with your first solutions as part of your data strategy, you need to be creating lots of capabilities while you're creating value, and striking that balance is kind of the trick. That's the art, and that's what you're trying to do. Because if you get if that equation gets too sideways, so in other words, if you're creating a lot of value and you're addressing a lot of business needs, but you're not creating a lot of capabilities at the same time, you're probably creating tactical solutions that aren't sustainable. And if you're focused on just creating data management capabilities but aren't adding value to the business needs, you're probably doing data activities for data's sake, and you're really creating a science project that's going to go on the shelf. So striking that balance is really important. So, so what are we analyzing? So holistically, we're going to analyze people, organization, processes, data management practice, assets, both data and technology.
Jim, we need to know exactly where you are so that we recommend something that is appropriate for your organization.
So I'm just going to get this all up on the screen, and really it's not just understanding all those components, but it is also understanding how they're related to each other. So when we look at the solution is going to follow the same framework, right? And really, I think about it starting with the business processes in the middle, and that the business process is what is actually going to deliver the value in the end to meet the business needs, right? And the processes are enabled by the people in the organization, by the data assets, and by the technology assets, right? And it's the people and organization and the business processes that are going to give context to what is important in those data assets. And we wrap those data assets in data management practices, and those practices are the governance, the quality, the strategy. These are the things that enable the data assets to be leveraged throughout the organization. And if you look at the technology assets, they play a critical role, and it's an enabling role. And they're enabling both processes, data, and the ability to measure the effectiveness of your data assets. So what we're going to do is quickly just sort of walk through each one of these components. There's a whole lot that we could discuss one of these for a whole webinar, but we're just going to lightly touch on them. Yeah, we'll do it at EDW. But first, Peter's going to talk about really the two different kinds of approaches you can take to thinking about your solutions.
Many of you will have noticed on that last chart that we actually break the data management component out separately from IT.
Yeah, exactly.
And the key to this, of course, is that we've been developing things in what we call the application-centric mode. And this is the idea that organizations correctly start off with a strategy, get some goals and objectives, end up with some systems and applications to implement those goals and objectives, to see how they're monitoring, and then, of course, we get a network infrastructure and data and information. Unfortunately, become the tail end of this. First of all, because our educational systems woefully neglect this process, and second, because most people who are doing software have no interest at all in how data works, because data works at a different cadence, a different pace than does software. The problems, of course, are that this makes sure that most organizations have processes that are wrapped around their organizational applications and not able to reuse their data or really leverage their data. So our data-centric model now looks like this, where we say the next thing after your goals and objectives should be the data layer before you do any selection of any software packages, applications, or anything else. This will prevent the conversation from being sucked up into the black hole that is most ERPs, and instead that you can develop these data assets from an organization-wide perspective. You can complement your existing organizational data flows, and let's be frank here, every measurement that we've looked at over the past 20 years has shown that we are reusing zero of our software. Software is hard to go in and categorize. Data is hard too, but data is a lot easier to categorize and reuse than software is, so this gives us the opportunity to maximize the data flow.
So walking through those components that we had in our framework for the analyzing the current state. So what are we looking for when we're analyzing? You can imagine we're looking at organizational structures, any documentation you have around that. And we're really, assessing the culture. And we do that in multiple ways. We ask leadership what the culture is, and then we go ask people what it really is.
It'd be nice.
Yeah, and why we're looking at people, right? We want to understand really the roles and responsibilities and skills, and how adaptable the organization is to change. But, it's really, this is the nuances driving the operating environment.
The key for a lot of this, too, is that you're seeing a lot of words around the CDO out there on the web. And the key is that up to this point, data has been everybody's responsibility, which means nobody's been doing anything about it. So until you put a single person dedicated solely to leveraging data assets, make sure that they report to the business and get them out of an IT project mindset constraint, there's no way that these things can succeed.
So again, when we're looking at the business processes, what are we looking for? We're looking at process flow diagrams. Of course, we want to understand who are all the actors, basically the inputs and the people that are inputting and outputting, could be systems. What are the pain points around those processes? And again, I've talked about this is where the value of the data is going to be realized. And the Dr. Tom Redmond, who's leading expert on data quality, he has this really great saying that there are two events in the life of data that are most important. It's when it's created and when it's used, right? And both of those occur in a business process. When you're thinking about data and your data assets, you really want to think about it in that context. Is this process creating data, changing my data, or is this using my data? Because typically that link between where data is created and where it's used is broken. So if you want to know where your data quality issues are, it's that there's a disconnect between how the data is being used and the requirements for using the data and how it's being created.
So just a quick point on this. Many times organizations have existing process architectures. About 1 in 10 organizations we go to can pull these things off the shelf and help us. But there are now some tools that you can use to automate the process of understanding these, whether you're reading log files and all sorts of other things. Again, this is an area that we've become quite expert at and that we help to transfer that knowledge to you all so that you can do it as well.
So data management practices, again, these are the activities that we think of in order that allow us to leverage the data. And so these are processes in and of themselves, but it's really very, very focused on either governing or structuring, organizing, and managing the quality of the data. So in a lot of ways, we use a maturity model to look at data management practices.
And we're real happy to announce that the SEI has put forth something called the Data Management Maturity Model, and we're working on it really hard. Again, we don't have time to go through this. It's a separate webinar in itself, but it's the idea of understanding how you manage your data coherently, whether you have the right support in the organization, how's your architecture implemented, how's your engineering implemented, managing the data assets professionally, and maintaining fit-for-purpose data around this. Each of these slides is a separate topic entirely on this. But this is graded then on a 1 to 5 scale. Many of you are familiar with the maturity model that goes into this sort of thing here. We can tell where the organization is, and a level 2 organization isn't going to be able to do as much as a level 5 organization is. So again, it's a crawl, walk, and run scenario. We can combine these things very, very easily to come up with a measurement framework where we can show people. And what it really boils down to in the long run is that this lack of understanding here is sort of like the insight that Maslow came up with on his original piece of this. If you are cold, hungry, and naked in a rainstorm, you're probably not going to be self-actualizing unless you're writing a blues song. So when I say self-actualizing, go home on the weekends and you know, whatever it is, or at night that you read poetry or music or reading, whatever it is that you enjoy. And data is an awful lot like that because everybody's focused on this golden triangle, we call it, of data management practices, all the various buzzwords. We've been using this chart for 30 years, and the buzzwords change, but the basic process of the chart has not. If you don't understand that your basic data management practices are necessary in order to support this, and that these data management practices are linked by a weak link in the chain method, then you will concentrate on trying to do things just at the top by putting in an MDM solution without a fundamental basis. And you can do that. Our customers often require us to do that, but when you do, it takes longer, costs more, delivers less, and presents greater risk to the organization than otherwise it would.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So again, looking at the data assets, another component of that current state framework, you can see that really what we do is we go in and we take a very broad view of the data assets to really get an understanding of the entirety of the environment. But then based on the business needs, we start to get focused and look for, so again, in that example where we're looking at the trucking company, you know, we're going to dive into the master data around drivers, right? We're going to look at the driver's master data. We're going to look at driver safety records. We're going to look at driver's activities in terms of what routes they've taken, what loads they take, et cetera. But the point on this one that's really important to understand when you're doing this analysis is that not all data is created equal. Not all data impacts the business equally. And so when you're looking at, you know, that trucking company probably had literally 30,000 data elements, right? Well, you can't solve problems by fixing completely 30,000 data elements. So part of this exercise of the current state is getting at what is important within that organization. And then dealing typically with the data quality issues. So again, I'm bringing up something that we've interpreted from Dr. Tom Redman's 3 approaches to data quality. And I think when you're looking at your data assets and you're looking at data quality, once you determine what is important, and I can tell you right now, some organizations, you could probably pick 12 data elements, and then if you were to ensure that they were correct the first time, it could change the life of that organization. But Tom is really saying that there's 3 ways to deal with data quality issues. You can ad hoc processes as saying that you're just going to deal with it when you consume it, and everybody's going to manipulate the data and make it work for them. And this is where the boss asks for, you know, the same question of 3 different people, and he gets 3 different answers, right? You can do the find and fix, which is to say, well, I'm going to just find all the errors after they happen and fix them. And what you'll find is you'll never get in front of that. The only way to really deal with this strategically is get at the root cause and deal with those data quality issues at the source. And this is another thing. This is Peter's death by 1,000 cuts. When you're talking about data quality, there's no better way to describe it than to say that data quality issues are like death by 1,000 cuts. There probably is not any one data quality issue that stands out and just everybody's screaming about it. What it is data quality issues are in everybody's jobs every day, and they're finding ways to work around them. And it's collectively all those issues that you're trying to address. So why are we looking at the data assets? It's really to identify those pain points, right? You want to compartmentalize and decouple the data from the systems and think about the data as a separate thing, right? Because it's going to provide you a measure of complexity in developing the solution about how complex really is your environment and then how complex does your solution have to be. Technology assets really is the same thing. It's taking a broad view of the technology assets and then based on the business needs, drilling into those areas that are most impactful to the solution you want to create. The one thing I'll say on this slide is, and it's the last bullet, and maybe it should have been on the previous slide, is that I tell you what, if you want to find out where the pain points are in an organization, go look for the shadow technology. So who has a SQL Server or Microsoft Access system running underneath their desk? Because that is something that someone had to create because they're feeling some pain.
And you really know it when they say, please don't tell IT.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Right. So how to analyze, you can read this. I think the important thing to realize is the requisite skills. You know, it's critical thinking. It's really just never being satisfied with the answer, being very inquisitive. But you are going to have to collaborate with a lot of people across the organization, and tenacity. So don't assume what you're hearing is correct. You're going to have to validate that for yourself. So getting here to the solution, really, this is about closing the gaps. We looked at this before, and we're developing, again, the solution is going to create value and develop capabilities at the same time. And the expected results, we've talked about this, but the solution is going to be tailored. So if you're looking for an out-of-the-box data strategy solution, and we've had people ask us for the checklist of what do we need to do in order to be able to create a data strategy, and it's just not possible. And I will say that the data problems are very often the same across organizations. They store the customer data in multiple places, so they don't know which email address is the same. But what is important, and it goes back to the business needs, is that the solutions you're creating are unique, right? Problems may be the same, but the solutions are unique because each organization creates value in a different way. And you want to have your strategy aligned to that thing that is unique about your organization to create value. So we've looked at this again, and you know, what's part of this is a change management plan. How much of change management needs to be included as part of this solution? So this...
My favorite chart in the world, Louis.
Yeah, so, and I don't know who to attribute this to. This is not my chart. And sometimes it may not make sense until you're actually in the situation, but if you look at the bottom, the 5 things you need to be able to create change. You need a vision, you need the skills, you need to have the motivation, you need to have the investment, right, and you need to have a plan. And I cannot tell you the number of times where I've been in a project where it was not working, and you go back and you look, and is it spot on? This chart is spot on. One of the large companies we worked with, they didn't have a vision. They had everything else in place, and there was mass confusion. So this is very useful if you're trying to figure out if you're in the middle of what seems like a train wreck to look at this chart. So really, when you think about the approach, we think of it in a crawl, walk, run way, right? Because at the beginning, you're learning how to do this. You don't know how to do this. You want to do something that's achievable. So you need to start crawling. And it's back to that idea. If you remember, the solution is creating value and creating capability. Well, when you're crawling, you know, you're probably creating more capability than you are value. But as you go on and on and on, you know, you should be creating more value, and the capability should just be in place and allow you to run.
Of course, what you end up with is a team that can actually do it.
That's right. That's exactly right. So really, the benefits is that it gets people on board. It starts to get people focused on this. It's achievable and allows you to develop those foundational components over time. And here are some of the deliverables that typically go with the roadmap. And again, at EDW, I'll be focused really in this part of the presentation, showing examples of roadmaps, showing examples of the deliverables and the artifacts that get created in order to implement a data strategy.
So we're right back at the top of the hour here. Again, Lewis mentioned Enterprise Data World. We're looking to see everybody there, but for us, this is the enjoyable part. We're now going to turn it back over to you guys for some questions and answers. So you can dive down on some of the things that perhaps were unclear or things that you'd like more detail in, or just even a reference on the books that we referenced before, too. Dropped your picture on that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
Get that off there and go back there. It's more fun. Megan?
All right. Thank you, Peter and Lewis. That was an awesome presentation. Now it's time for our Q&A. Time for you all to ask your questions, so just click on the Q&A window feature at the top of your screen. You should be able to submit your questions through that Q&A window. And we've already had some start to roll in, so we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see here. The first question is, do you find this concept requires business data governance and a related framework to be effective?
Yeah, how else would you do it, right? So I'm sure the person's setting us up for that particular one, but thanks for a nice softball question. So the language of data governance is metadata. Data governance should be focused on problems that are helping to implement your data strategy. If they're not, what are they doing? And so we see an awful lot of groups that have gone down various rabbit holes and things. Liz, I know you came off a project recently where they were all, just diversified.
Right.
It's like we need somebody to focus on that. That's talking about missing the vision on that.
Right.
If you got a bunch of people spending money, doing things, and all this sort of stuff, and they don't know why they're doing it, what the end state is supposed to be, shame on the organization for letting that particular piece go out of there. So absolutely, data governance is critical to this. We used to wrap it up and assume a lot of this in data. We're real happy that data governance has been broken out as a separate strategy around this. And if you, I can switch back to that chart on the framework, you'll see governance is a huge part of that. So whoever set that question up, thanks. There we go, there's the governance piece. Right in there, you can see it's the orange chart. If you're not managing the data assets professionally, there's no way they would let you, well, let's put it this way. Right now, your data is being managed by heroics in most organizations. And these people are trying their best and are fairly frustrated that they're not able to do more with this. But if you pull the data governance piece out of even this framework, this particular framework collapses. These are interdependent components, and governance is a very key piece.
And I think that's it right there, Peter. It's interdependent. And really, this is a strategy. And to the degree that you need all these components, or you need the degree to which you need to include all the stuff that we showed and the current state analysis, may vary, but you need them all, right? We're talking about a strategy, so it needs to be measurable. These are not negotiable things. Say, well, we can do everything but governance. Then you shouldn't do it, right? You should try an organic approach, because there are certain pieces that are just prerequisites to this working, and that's why it's so hard to become data-driven. Right? These aren't, optional things. I don't want to do all those. I only want to do some, or my boss didn't understand that one, so we can't do that one. Then it's just not going to work.
We tell people it's kind of like trying to walk around with one shoe on.
Yeah.
We mentioned Lewis's tutorial. He's going to go 3 hours deep on some of these topics in terms of the roadmap. Melanie Mecca from the SEI and I are going to go about 3 hours on this particular chart here. Don't worry, it's not all this chart, but it's a tremendous piece of research that's come out. We're really, really pleased to have that. What's the next question, Megan?
All right, the next question is, how should an organization operationalize to manage and measure their data management programs towards the targets set during earlier road mapping / strategy phase?
Well, we're both kind of pausing on that. Why don't you read it again? Let's move on it.
Sure. How should an organization operationalize to manage and measure their data management programs towards the targets set during earlier road mapping or strategy phase?
Sure. So that's a great question, and actually it's further than we've gone into in this particular presentation. I'm trying to go back here, Lewis, to the ACS overview chart.
Yeah, we'll go back in this direction.
Sorry, hang on. I'm going to just give everybody some context here. This good question. So it's really beyond. Can I get that to move?
There you go.
PowerPoint. There we go. That one.
Yeah.
So what the question is the group's got the roadmap in place, and now they're trying to move forward and operationalize it. So assuming they've come in, they've developed a roadmap by doing what Lewis has described in this chart here, and now we want to see how well data management is contributing towards that. So the key there, again, goes back to those objective measurements. Let's take the chemical engineering company that we were describing earlier, because everybody's heard that story. If we decided that a chemical engineer must, on average, historically, have done about 6 different formulations in a year, and I'm making this up. It has nothing to do with real numbers, but if they do 6 formulations a year, we have to define what a formulation is. And we have to be careful, because the way it won't work is by somebody standing over you with a stopwatch and saying, it's been 2 months, have you done one, Lewis, right? But you do have to come back at the end of that and look at it maybe on a rolling average and say, okay, is it going up or down? Is it 6 to 6.5 now in there? So it's actually the next step in this, and we've actually got another presentation that addresses that. Most people aren't quite there yet, but when you take your roadmap, part of the roadmap is what are the specific capabilities in data management and other areas that we need to have in place in order to successfully implement this strategy.
And I think the operational is really, it is a great question. So let's assume you've got all this in place and I've got a roadmap. And I think it's your choice of what you're going to put in the roadmap early that allows you, because sometimes getting started is the hardest part. And so at the very beginning, you know, and I think I had it in here, but I didn't mention it, but it's about choosing something that's achievable. And so a lot of that means finding an advocate on the business side. This has really been my experience in especially large organizations, because you have all kinds of people with all kinds of motivations at the senior business level, and you really need them to be involved in a data strategy. So you have to find that advocate, right? And you have to pick something that, you know, is going to add value. So something that's clearly a pain point and a gap that's understood, and it needs to be achievable, because a lot of times when you get into these data problems and you're trying to solve the problem strategically, it's like peeling an onion or opening a can of worms. I mean, it just keeps going on and on. You know, and a lot of times, you know, all roads lead back to the master data is just messed up. You know, and solving for all the customer master data doesn't look like a small project anymore. So I think, you know, that is part of the art of this at the very beginning, is trying to get that balance between being able to solve a problem and operationalize and create capability. So in terms of governance, what we've often done to operationalize governance is, I said this earlier, is find 1 or 2 data elements that are really important to the organization, or that are at least important to 2 divisions. So you have 2 different groups that kind of have 2 views on a customer ID, a patient ID, or product ID, right? And realize some pain point that is occurring around that data element, that if somehow either the type or some of the metadata related to that data item could be agreed through or agreed to or adjudicated in a governance structure, all of a sudden now you're able to establish a governance process. Maybe you can establish a policy, and it's focused on something that's meaningful to 2 business units. And just doing that is one way to begin to operationalize data governance, data quality, and bringing value to the organization.
And let me also distinguish, Liz, because oftentimes when we give this talk, people get confused between low-hanging fruit and practical stuff.
Yeah.
And so everybody wants to go after the low-hanging fruit because it's easy, you could just reach up and grab it. What Lewis is describing here is a process of finding something that's meaningful, and the reason you know it's meaningful is because you have 2 groups that normally don't cooperate or don't work together.
Right.
They actually have found the time and effort to work together. We did, I did a kickoff session for a project yesterday, and our measure for that success of that team was how many business people showed up at the meeting, and we were astounded. We went back at the end of it and did high fives. You know, wow, we had twice as many business people as we thought we would have in that meeting. So that's a set of measures that you can put there. I'm sure there's a lot more we could go into. We don't have time here, but if the questioner wants to ping us out for that, we'd be glad to go into a little more detail on that.
All right, great. And the next question is, someone would like you to distinguish the difference between a CIO and a CDO.
Sure.
Peter, that's all you.
So sometimes it makes me popular and sometimes it doesn't. I first of all have to always issue a very good disclaimer. I've worked with some absolutely astoundingly good CIOs who are just top-notch and who really get this stuff, but they get it not necessarily because they've been educated about that. There is no CIO school that you can go to. Don't worry, there's a lot of people that will sell you CIO school. But when we look at the trends that are occurring, CIOs originally were largely technically focused the last 10 years or so. People weren't satisfied with the overall IT results, so they started saying we should get more business-focused CIOs and this sort of thing. And when you look at what the CIOs are actually asked to do, it's a tremendous amount of material that we've asked them to become good at. The real key for all of this is that we've got to now step back and say that data fundamentally is a business asset that is different from IT. So the chart I'm showing here, and giving a small little plug for my 100-page book called The Case for the Chief Data Officer, is that over time, and this is a period of measure that I did of 2005 to 2011, we took the top 5 things that CIOs are being asked to do. And we looked at the various topics and how they were trending over time. So it's an interesting chart. It's not, the main message is CIOs are really focused on an awful lot. And what that has done in the vast majority, 9 out of 10 organizations, we find data is an underutilized asset. In fact, it's the most underutilized asset that organizations have, and we don't tend to train people very well on how to do this. So consequently, what we end up with is a situation where the CIO, if they're asked to do more with data, they're going to have to drop something else. So the CDO is a business-focused individual who is working closely with the CIO to make sure that both of them advance the organizational goals and strategies. But the Chief Data Officer has a single focus, and that focus is on leveraging their data asset management. And they need to do that in a way that is upstream from, separate, and distinct from all other IT activities. Because if we try to manage it as part of all the other IT activities, we know the success rate there has been very poor. 1 out of 3 IT projects actually comes in with close to full-time, full capabilities and within budget on this. And that's not a very good track record. If I had a dentist that said I've got a 1/3 chance of pulling your root canal off correctly, I could find myself another dentist.
So I have an opinion on this, and this is that a chief data officer, in my mind, is responsible for the requirements, the business requirements, maybe even the functional requirements for the data. And I'm a technologist building global systems for Fortune 18 companies. You know, I love technology, and I will tell you right now that the solution to anything around data or technology is the requirements. It's the business requirements. And really well-defined problem and set of requirements is easily 50% of the solution. So I think the CDO is not only responsible for those requirements, meaning getting those requirements, but governing those requirements, right? Because those requirements don't disappear after they get implemented somewhere, right? The controls need to be in place. They need to be governed. They need to be ensured that they're being followed. They need to be enhanced over time. So in my mind, you know, IT is looking for someone to give them the requirements. At least I always was. And I think the CDO is really the one who plays that role as data is becoming, you know, vastly more important to the organization. As Peter said, CIOs just don't have any more bandwidth. They need someone to help them with that aspect.
All right, great. And the next question is, how long should it take to develop a data strategy for an organization?
Good question. So not years.
Not years. And I do think that it is, you know, and it's depending on the organization, and it may have been in one of the slides. I do think you can create a data strategy for a, you know, a division, a business unit, some other, you know, organizational construct less than the enterprise. So I do think that that's possible, and I do think that that is often a great approach. to evolving a data strategy within an organization is to have it at some lower functional level. And I typically think it's months. And of course, it depends on the size of the organization. And a lot of it has to do with, it's very basic stuff. How many people are we going to have to talk to? You know, how much change management, you know, are we going to have to consider? You know, how complex is the organization? You know,
how well do they know their own internal processes?
Yeah, but it's months. And when I say months, it's, you know, I don't think we've ever done one in less than 2 months. And I think we've spent as much as 6 months putting one together. So, you know, it's somewhere in that range.
We had one group that had, you know, recently several mergers had taken place. So there were like 4 or 5 different new groups all getting to know each other. That's a much more complicated situation than an organization that actually has a very well-functioning IT group, but just has neglected data for a while. And so it makes a big difference what the starting point is.
But change management is a real critical component because you're doing change management while you're doing the data strategy.
All right, great. And the next question is, how does one get past heroics when resources are constrained?
Yeah, it's
So the most important thing is to actually show the effect of that on there. When we, I'll give you a story here. Working for one organization, and they had a data center go down in the middle of it. And the organization was very focused on this culture of heroics. They cultivated that. They wanted people to work long and hard for the organization, and the associates were terrific at it. But when this data center went down, they actually, it took them 3 days to get it back up and running, which was sort of an amazing thing in and of itself. And this was 3 days of continuous work. So we're talking 72 hours on this. You know, this was literally, the people were inside, they were working on this thing, and they were sliding pizza under the door and just feeding them. And they eventually brought in a film crew and started to film the organization and to show how dedicated people were and how these people, you know, they're celebrating the effect of this. I got a hold of the film and re-edited it and pointed out to them that if they had actually been managing their metadata better, that the entire failure wouldn't have occurred in the first place. And I was told under no circumstances will you ever show that film to anybody because you'll ruin our culture here. So that's clearly a corporate value that they had in order to do this. So what we're talking about here is to show people the impact of this. And some organizations, frankly, don't want to know. But that's okay, all right? If they don't want to know, that's not a problem. But if you can take and do the opposite of what we were talking about in terms of building the measures, if you unpack those measures the other way and say that your researchers here are only 20% productive, you're paying these people a lot of money, or your IT people are spending 80% of their time going back and doing all kinds of things that they really shouldn't have to do. I had another measure that I came up with for one organization too. It was that they had a number of HR professionals and you know, tens of thousands of employees, so it was a pretty good sized organization. And I said, so you've got, you know, basically a couple hundred HR professionals that are managing your HR resource, and you've got 3 people managing your data. It just doesn't seem to be the right number. And that kind of heroics is admirable in organizations, and these people are very valuable. If you can find those heroes, you can actually hire them, give them a paying job, and you know, 40 hours a week instead of 80 hours a week. But that's not really the way most people want their organizations to run.
Right, and I think, again, when we're talking about a data strategy, we're really talking about a top-down approach. So there needs to be the sponsorship for the data strategy. And if the organization is not willing to invest in that and realize there needs to be an investment in that, you know, the other approach is to do it organically and to find, as Peter was saying, you know, don't spend your effort trying to create some enterprise or grand solution. You know, find something that you can do organically and start to build momentum that way within the organization. So, you know, if the organization is dealing with heroes, doesn't want to invest, you know, any more resources and wants a data strategy, that sounds like a unsolvable problem, right? I would, you know, not touch that. And
we have. We said what we do though in those circumstances is we'll help a part of the organization out. And this comes to the application-centric versus data-centric thinking as well. what you're really talking about is changing entirely the way IT works. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about, because there is a fundamental flaw in this. So they say, well, I can't do that. I can't talk people into doing that. We say, that's okay. You don't have to talk people into doing it, but can you run an experiment? Can you do this for a part of the organization? Can you develop this group? And one of the things Lewis and I have both been very successful at is getting a group to do this, and then all of a sudden this group is outperforming the other group, and we say, why are they doing it better? And the answer is Group A has a data strategy. It may only apply to the 15 or so people that are working within that part of the organization. They're clearly demonstrating better results. So now let's take that data strategy for the work group and expand it to a department. And again, compare it against other departments and see how that.
And that is a valid approach. So the heroics is still, a way to get there. That just, we were looking at it from very much a top down in this particular discussion.
And it's typically because we come in that way as well. So.
Any other questions, ma'am?
We actually have a few more questions left, and we've got about 10 minutes left before 3:30, so we'll go ahead and go down to the next one. Do you see this as a useful strategy for an organization to move into a new market sector? For example, a defense company who wants to diversify into commercial market space.
Yes, and
I think it'd be critical.
Right.
I think it'd be the perfect time to do it.
Again, the hard part of this is taking the legacy that we have and turning it into something useful. If you've got a greenfield situation where you're building something new out.
So, sometimes, we'll be working with what I'll call a traditional organization, a healthcare insurance company, property and casualty insurance company, and they want a data strategy. And, in some of the initial conversations with senior management, they'll say, well, we want to be like Google or Facebook or something like that. And our response is, you can't think like that, because when they started off as a data organization, right? Your starting point is so vastly different than their starting point. Your journey is going to be different to a data-driven organization. So in this case, and what they're asking for is an opportunity to say, okay, how are we going to be data-driven before we create some bad habits, or before we base the new organization based on how the old organization was structured. So I think this would actually be the critical time, and I think it would take so much less time than it typically takes us to do a data strategy, to Peter's point, because you're not having to go back through and look at all the legacy stuff and existing stuff. You might have to focus more on business need, because that may be a little bit more ambiguous or abstract. But still, I think that would be the perfect time to do a data strategy. It would be, much smaller, wouldn't be, quite as complex.
And then the other part of data strategy, we don't actually get to the feedback loop on this one because most people are just trying to get it started. But where you start, if you're going to go off and chase Google and you're going to spend 5 years becoming the next Google, guess what Google's doing? They're going to be 5 years out in front of you as well. And so, again, what we find is that most organizations really don't understand strategy. And that's really the part. They don't understand data or the strategy, but the strategy part's something we've had to
We've been surprised. Right?
Exactly. Sorry, Megan, go ahead.
All right, and the next question is, what is the role of data requirements in agile projects?
Good question. So my simple answer for that, which is an overly simple answer, is that an agile project should not be started unless you have full understanding of the data requirements. If you don't understand your requirements fully, you should not be doing an agile project of building software. Now, that doesn't help most organizations because they're actually stuck in that exact situation. But if you look at it, data evolves over time in a relatively slow fashion. And your Agile project is designed to build software projects for speed. And Agile is a tremendously successful process for doing that. But when you're building software, you shouldn't be building data.
Yeah. So I had the fortunate experience to work on for Wall Street organization, and where we were able to rebuild the entire back office for, they were probably at that point a global 25 institutional trading business. And so this is a $500 million project over 5 or 6 years, and the idea was that they were modernizing basically their mainframe systems, and so the leaders of this program were going to take a data-centric approach, and this is years and years ago. This is over a decade ago, and their data-centric approach really, at that point in time, really even before Agile came out, but the pressure pushed us into our own native form of Agile, but we developed the data models before you could start building the application. It's not to say that we didn't have to come back and adjust the data models based on, the further details we got as we built the application. And I will tell you that, and I'd be glad to share this in a longer story with anybody, that was the greatest, work experience in terms of what we were able to accomplish and the impact on the organization. And we did that for 5 years. I mean, we had to rebuild components. I bet there was 40 components in that mainframe we had to replace on a global scale. And every time we would do the data model before we would do the application, and it worked. So a trade ID was a trade ID was a trade ID was a trade ID, and you could trace that trade through the entire workflow and have all the other activities tied to it because you thought about the data before you built the applications.
Yep. So again, building software is a different process than building data structures, and they have to be separated and they have to occur in sequence. If you build your software and then try to build your data structures, the only possible outcome from that are more small piles of data, which Data Blueprint, I guess, will come in and clean up for you sooner or later. Sorry, couldn't resist. He's hit me on that one.
No, I didn't.
All right, and next question is, after the roadmap is established, what are some effective ways to hold people accountable to the data entered given many hands and silos are touching the same data set?
It's a great question, and it really gets at the fundamental issues of data quality. And I sort of ran through this kind of quickly earlier. So there's a couple things to this. One, data governance is really the key to ensuring that accountability. But the role of data governance is to first understand what are the requirements of the data that's being used. So because what is happening is the people that are creating the data typically, and they could be people, systems, and it is very complex, do not really understand what the requirements are for those that are using the information. So in my mind, it's data governance is to help understand what those requirements are and then build a bridge for those requirements to get back to where that data is actually getting created. And then governance is to implement controls once those requirements are understood and implemented. But often people, this is why, and it's often very hard because what you're finding is to get at the root cause, I've got to go back and fundamentally change something about my master data management, how a new customer signs up, right? How we add a new product to our inventory. And these sometimes seem like very daunting tasks, but if you don't deal with that, then you're going to end up doing a find and fix of the data, and you will be in this endless cycle of never getting ahead of it. So I think governance and getting at really what are the requirements for how the data is going to be used and build a bridge back to where the data is created the first time.
Great answer.
Okay, great. And the last question is, let's see, where did it go? How does the CDO have any leverage if he does not control IT staff or projects?
Okay. Goes back into the charter that's going on. When on my chart, I won't bother to go back to it on this particular piece, but they work coordinated with the CIO. About half the CIOs, when I present this idea to them, say, yeah, you're right, and I can't do any more with data, so I'd be really glad to take that responsibility and give it to somebody else. But they understand the needs for it. They understand the need to cooperate and collaborate in this space. So what we end up with is a situation where the chief data officer then says to people, look, before you select a software package, let's get the logical data models for this package. And by the way, if the vendor is not going to supply the data models, we're not going to actually even consider the package in this particular context. It's an evolving situation, but we're seeing lots and lots of successes. I must have spoken at 10 different conferences on that exact topic last year. Again, lots more detail, but we probably won't have time to get into it here.
All right, it looks like that's the last of the questions. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's event. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Our webinar next month will be Business Value from MDM. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Shannon.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, and just a reminder to everyone that I'll get a follow-up email within the next 2 business days containing links to the slides, to the recording of the session, and there's been several requests for the book. So, Megan, if you can help make sure that I have links to the first book mentioned, there wasn't a picture or anything associated with that one, then that would be great, and I'll get that out and make sure it's in the Dataversity bookstore for everyone to find.
Okay, that was good, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Louis, for joining us, and thanks, Peter, as always, for a great presentation. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.